Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, fantasy fiction fans. Welcome to another edition of Myth and Magic. So this week I'm speaking to the wonderfully talented and very, very amusing multiple award-winning English author, Claire Buss. And she chats with me about spice ghosts, the Gaia hypothesis, the rapid release strategy, Wilbur Smith, and also being the deputy editor of the Write On magazine. So this is an interview you don't want to miss, especially if you're a fan or a writer of dystopian fiction. So let's go straight over to the east side of London, to Southend in Essex, and speak with the extraordinarily talented Claire Buss. Hi. Hi, Claire.
Hi. Hey.
So, I read that you won the second prize, or the second place in the Barking and Dagenham pen to print writing competition in 2015. So I'm assuming you're over on the east side of London, is that right?
I used to be.
Right.
I've since moved now, so I live in Southend now.
Southend? That's even more east side of London. So would you say you're an Essex girl or not?
No.
To explain to American audience, because there's a lot of American listeners out there, and Essex girl has a certain reputation, so that's why people don't normally admit.
No.
But were you raised in the east side of London?
No, I'm from Peterborough originally. So
okay, yeah. Which is also in the east.
It's still east, yeah, I guess.
And I assume, therefore, that the pen to print writing competition, that kind of set you on the writing trajectory and into a life of writing. Am I right by thinking that?
It did, absolutely. It all came about. I just had my little boy, and I wasn't working, and my local library had a free writing course. Yeah. And writing was something I'd always fancied having a go at, and I thought, oh, maybe I could sign up to that. And so I sent them an email, and they were fully booked. So I was like, oh well, that's that. Yeah. And then they got in touch and said, oh, we've had such a fantastic response. We're going to run an extra session. So if you want a spot, you can come along. So I did that and came along to the writing group. And it was through that I found out about the book challenge competition. Yeah. And I didn't read the instructions properly. So I thought that it was just entering the first chapter. And I didn't have a first chapter, so I came up with an idea, put one together, sent it in, and then I got shortlisted, which was amazing. Nice. To be told that they needed the book in 3 months so that they could judge the competition. And of course, I didn't have a book because I had only got the one chapter. So that was interesting. I was really lucky. I was assigned a mentor, a chap called Ian Ayres, who is a published writer himself. Yeah. And we met probably about once a week in the coffee shop. The first couple of sessions were spent calming me down because I was having complete panic attack about the fact that I had to write an entire book in 3 months. And then the rest of the time was literally me trying to write as much as possible, getting it over to Ian to sort of go through and guide me and, tell me to stop using so many commas, that sort of thing. Yeah. Doing line and copy editing as we went, really, in order to enter the book. And then, as I say, I came second, which was amazing, really.
Amazing. Yeah. What sort of book was that? So it was a novel, was it? It
was a novel, and that was my first book, The Gaia Effect, which is the first in a trilogy of the hopeful dystopian books.
Okay, that's excellent. We'll talk a bit about hopeful dystopia in a minute. But how many words was that first book?
About 70,000.
Right, but it's still quite a reasonable amount, isn't it? Especially
Yeah.
for mums. Well, that's excellent. And how old is your lad now?
He's 8.
Have you got any other kids?
Yes, I've got a little girl. She'll be 4 in December.
Right. So that was kind of nearly 8 years ago.
Yeah. Well, it was 2015. So
Right, okay.
yeah. About 6 years. 6 years.
I just tried to get my head around it. So therefore, you've been a busy mum since then. That's really what I'm trying to think about. Yeah,
Yes.
you've got a busy life.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you write humorous fantasy and what you call hopeful dystopia, which I love the idea of, although I want to go into that because I feel it's a bit of an oxymoron. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And you also write little books of poetry. So let's take each of those one at a time then. So I suppose with satire, which is humorous fantasy, you can get away with things. You can criticize things like the establishment and that sort of thing, but doing it in a light-hearted way. Is that how you see satire?
Yes, absolutely. Although I don't intentionally sit down and think, oh, what can I poke fun at today?
Yeah.
It just kind of happens. My characters have very strong voices, and the world that they live in just tends to be this sort of wry world, and you just spend yourself sort of smiling along as you're reading, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. Do you share the same thoughts as your characters? Because I do sometimes, not always. Like I try to create a character who's completely different to me. They always end up thinking the same as me in the end. Do you share the same kind of, opinions and world viewpoints?
I think it's quite hard not to, because you write what you understand. So I don't like write what you know, but I think you write what you understand.
Yeah.
So if you've had a great love, you've lost love, then you can write about that with feeling and with clarity. And if you're passionate about something, that comes across whether you mean it to or not. And I'll never forget, somebody said, I know we're going to talk about the Gaia books later on, but somebody commented on how political they were, and I was really surprised because I don't consider myself to be a political person at all. So it's just, I think, your readers will take what they understand from it as well, and make their own decisions on things. So yes.
So humorous fantasy, is that kind of influenced by Terry Pratchett? That's one who immediately jumps to mind for me. Is that your influence?
Absolutely, yes. But I also read a lot of Piers Anthony when I first started reading fantasy, which is another humorous fantasy guy, and Douglas Adams, of course. I don't intentionally write humour either. It just kind of happens. I'm very much the person sitting in the back of the room watching other people, and sort of smiling to myself at how people interact and how they talk and the things that people think are important and the different sort of foibles that people have. I'm an observer, as most writers are, of course. Exactly. And I just find those things so amusing, and I find they come out in my characters. And it's in my most recent book, one of my characters, we discovered that he has a fear of crabs. And that becomes quite an important plot line in the book. And I just think it's just so funny. I just think people are funny. So,
That's for sure, they are. I've never met a nautilus crab. Do you know what a nautilus crab is? It's one of those things which looks like a German Second World War helmet with a long tail.
Oh, yes.
And it hasn't even got any arms or legs or even eyes.
Yes, I know what you mean.
That's the only thing, and this is literally true, that I'm scared of in the whole world. And yet, when would I ever meet a nautilus crab? I think they live in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not likely to visit that.
No, exactly.
So that's first book, the first book that you won for the pen to print competition. What's that basically about? What's the kind of theme behind that?
So it's set roughly 200 years in the future. There's been a big event, which I don't go into in too much detail, but basically humans wiped out a lot of the planet. So we used up all the resources, we destroyed their environment, and the few humans that survived were scattered across the world in these small cities where everything was self-contained, and the technology was developed enough to look after that small group of people. So they had technologies to recycle water, etc., and to get their food and that. And everyone has a place. Everyone is assigned their duty, as it were, and we all live under the rule of corporation,
right?
Who look after everyone. And we join a group of friends, a group of women, and one of the women has been awarded collection, which basically means she's been assigned a child. So a child has been genetically grown for her and her husband, and they go to collect it because the human race is sterile.
Right.
They can't conceive naturally, and that's how they control the population, etc. And then events unfold, and a couple of her friends become pregnant naturally, and it's this big medical mystery. And it's almost like the final pebble that starts tipping the anti-core people who are against living that way and against corporation, and they want to be free and they want to go outside the wall and they want to see what's out there. And it's sort of that tiny pebble that starts this whole revolution. So that's book one. And there's more to it. The reason it's called the Gaia effect is because it's twofold, really. One is that I actually hint at the presence of Gaia, the spirit of the earth. And two, because when I, in my previous life, before children, I met, and I can't remember his name, it's gone completely out of my head, but I met the guy who came up with the Gaia hypothesis, which basically means that the earth will self-balance itself eventually.
Yeah.
It probably won't happen in our lifetime, in our children's lifetime, but eventually the planet will rebalance everything we've done to it. And I just find that idea so fascinating.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell. It's really hard to put your books in a nutshell because you know so much about them and you want to tell everyone everything, and obviously you can't.
I know. I always tell people that the worst bit of writing, I can quite happily sit down and enjoy myself writing that 85,000 word book, but I wouldn't want to write another blurb or another synopsis.
That's so hard. They're so hard.
If people spend a lot of money to get some help from professionals on editing and stuff, as far as I'm concerned, the only time it's worth spending any money is on a blurb writer and
on the blurbs. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, thank you for explaining that. So you are, in a way, a bit of a Gaia personality yourself, don't forget, because you are a mother, just like Mother Earth, but also you create worlds. Have you ever thought of that?
I haven't really, actually.
There's a deep bit of meaning for you there.
Yeah, I guess all writers are creators, really. But yeah, there was a lot of, I mean, obviously at the time my son was 2 and I did suffer a lot with postnatal anxiety, and there's a lot of that in there. How are you suddenly in charge of a life, and how do you deal with that, and how do you deal with that when your entire world around you is being turned upside down? So it's definitely has some of that in it.
So that's the dystopic bit, but the hopeful bit is that, number one, the whole world will naturally, because of revolutions, it will gradually repair itself. But also, in the meantime, motherhood is going on. During both the world wars, there were still mothers, there were still babies being born. During famines and through terrible strife, there's always new generations being born. So there's hope every day, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So there's hope in the children, and then they do go beyond the wall and they do find some small pockets of life, because life finds a way. And so so there's hope. The hope is there, but the hope sort of, it ends on a hopeful note, and then you have book 2 where everything starts to look rather bleak again, and then book 3 brings you back to the hopeful possibilities.
Lovely. And are all 3 books out, published?
Yes.
Oh, great, good. So let's quickly talk about those poems then. So you did write some little short poems, I think. So tell us a bit about those, because I think they are kind of breezy and light-hearted. Is this where you get your light-hearted mood from, rather than writing about dystopia?
I like writing poetry. I think it's a really good vehicle for expression of how you feel in the moment, really. And as a mother, you have to express something.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of poetry to do with being a mum. And also my poetry books, I've got 8 in total. Some of them are seasonal, so we talk about summer, winter, autumn, etc. I've got a Halloween one and a Christmas one, and it's just sort of drawing on those experiences and the things that you attach to those times of the year. You know, like in the autumn, it's all about the crunchy leaves, and I have this thing about pumpkin spice. I don't understand why everyone loves it, and it's everywhere because I don't like it. So I sort of make a bit of a joke on that. And yeah, just things like that. And I set myself a sort of mini challenge of writing a poem a week. That's then I had all these poems, and I thought, well, you know, why not? Why not put them into little books, little collections for people? And that's sort of how that developed, really.
In your mind's eye, who's that poem written to?
Well, they're written for me. They're written to me.
They're just like a diary entry.
They're poems for me, but I think it's really hard to sell poetry because people think they don't like it. But if you can get people to read poetry, they, much like when they read fiction, they make their own connections. And I'm lucky that I'm part of quite a good supportive author community. We do have a lot of authors in America and in Australia, and they find it sort of extra amusing because my poetry is very British.
Yeah.
So for them, there's sort of an extra layer that's not intended, but they sort of get more out of it from that aspect. And then, as I say, if it's motherhood, it's dealing with children, it's, you know, the school run and things like that. And when your child is ill, those poems, it's life, it's what's going on. So it's, and also my poetry doesn't always rhyme. My husband tells me off. He says, if it doesn't rhyme, it's not poetry. But I'm like, no, it doesn't have to rhyme. Some of it does, but not all of it does. It depends how I feel in the moment.
Exactly. So I suppose in poetry you're using specialist language. That's really what poetry is. Even if it's not rhyming, it's still specialist language. Certainly in satirical novels, you need to use paradox and the absurd. So do you use any of those? Do you consciously use any of those literary techniques? Or have you learned about those as you've been going along?
Not consciously. I think I just naturally think that way, because before I started writing at all, I used to blog, and I would have people comment on how funny my blogs were, and they weren't set out to be funny. I was just commenting on sort of life and the things that were happening, the things that I were observing, and I just think my natural commentary is rather, you know, I'll take a sort of humorous view of things, and it just sort of developed from there. And now my Roshaven books, my humorous fantasy books, the characters are really well developed. They all have their own voice and their own little habits, and they're so recognizable that it's really easy. It's like putting on a pair of slippers and just sitting down. And I'm also one of those awful pantser writers who doesn't plan anything. I'm very much a discovery writer. I have no idea what I'm going to write when I sit down. I usually have no idea what's going to happen in the book, no idea on the plot. I know who my characters are, but I have no idea how they're going to get from A to B. And that, for me, that's all part of the fun. I like that. But it does make it very difficult to sort of sit down and think, right, this book is going to be X, because it could very well turn out to be anything. Yeah.
I think a secret of humour is to not try to be funny. I mean, we're not stand-up comedians, we're just writing stuff. You know,
exactly.
If you set out to be funny, that's the same as if you set out to be clever or, you know, wicked. It's just not going to work. But I think that it will shine through the words that you use.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Do you ever allow your characters to take you by the hand and maybe take you to places you didn't really want to explore, but they've taken you there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when I was writing the Gaia effect, one of my characters dies unexpectedly, and that made me cry writing it. And I was like, I did not think this was going to happen.
Yeah.
I never sit down with a firm idea of what's going to happen. It's just a case of, right, here is my writing time. This is the word count that I would like to get. Yeah. Let's see what happens. Off we go. And I never read back. So the next day I'll just sit down, reopen the Word document and carry on.
Yeah, I've been doing the NaNoWriMo for 9 years now. So that's writing, you've got to write a minimum 50,000 words in 30 days. I don't know if you've ever attempted it. So it's similar to that thing that you did. I mean, that's been really useful, because what I've got at the end of that month is a really decent wad of material that obviously will take at least a year to go through and sort out and edit, but at least it's the basis of something good. So I know exactly what you mean. The idea of just getting on with it, even if it's only a few words a day, but just churning that stuff out is very important. And if you look back, it's dangerous. If you look back, it's almost like you're starting the editing process, and you don't want to edit anything until a good long period of time has passed, so you can look at it completely freshly. That's how I see it anyway.
I've done NaNoWriMo a few years. I wrote The Rose Thief, the Gaia Project, the Gaia Solution, the Silk Thief. They're all NaNoWriMo books. So
you've shared the same experiences as I have.
Yeah.
And I find that it's so useful, because it's just nice to be able to say to everybody, this is what I can say to my whole family and anybody who needs me. Sorry, but I don't do anything in November. You know that. You know it by now. I'm just writing this. It's a great way to continue. So tell us about this Rosshaven series then. So what are Spice Ghosts?
Okay, so the Spice Ghosts are in book 3, which comes out on the 12th of November.
Right.
So they're a new addition to the Rosshaven world. I can't tell you too much.
Right.
But let's say they're the conduit between the physical and the spirit realm.
Good, I like it. Like it already. Because that's one of the things we study a lot in Myth and Magic. We always talk about the threshold between our world that we presently live in and the other world. And I always think it's the absolutely vital element of any fantasy that we are tackling that. You always go from this world to the other world across this threshold. So sometimes you need a way to do that, like a portal, like for example in Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, where you actually go through the wardrobe, or like Looking Glass. But sometimes you need to have a person, like a medium, who can take you to this other world and then communicate from the other world. So I guess it's something like that. Is that right?
Well, they protect, they keep the realm separate, and they stop any bad elements coming through from the spirit realm, and they maintain the balance, making sure that when people pass on, they do pass on. But the problem is they've lost their magical bones.
All right.
And they think that one of my main characters, Jenny, stole them. And she doesn't know anything about it, and that's sort of the opener of the book.
Oh, excellent.
And it's about the book becomes figuring out who has the bones, how they're going to get the bones back, and then obviously there's a greater danger once they actually get to that point. So
wow, so that sounds like a bit of a detective mystery as well.
Yes, well, all my Rosshaven books centre around Ned and Jenny, and Ned is the chief thief catcher in Rosshaven, and Jenny is his sidekick, and it's their job to keep the peace and arrest the bad guys and investigate crime, etc. So,
wow. And where is Rosshaven?
It is a very tiny empire. It's this tiny little empire that used to be a lot bigger, but over time has shrunk to this one city. They still have their imperial palace, and they still have their emperor. They still have all the pomp and circumstance, but they just don't have any of the power anymore. They're right on the coast of a larger country called Efrana, and that is all the world building we have, because the 3 books have all been firmly set within Rosshaven with a short foray into a nearby town. But the next lot of books, we are going to go out into the world, and find out a bit more about this magical world that we live in. So
I love that. It reminds me of Venice. Have you been to Venice?
I have been to Venice, yes.
So fantastic, isn't it? I mean, not only everybody knows about the beauty and the drama and the poetry of it, but I find it quite amazing to think that those people, those explorers from just one city-state, went out and found basically the whole world. I mean, they even found America before anybody else had found it. They didn't know that they got there, but they managed to get there. But they sailed around the whole world, almost assuming global responsibility for all civilization. But they come from basically
this tiny little place.
Like Lido in the middle of a swamp. Yeah. So that's similar. The other thing that I reflected on when you were just telling me that is Great Britain, of course, which is, had this huge empire, bigger than the Roman Empire. And now, have we not got just Buckingham Palace and a couple of old buildings, and pomp and circumstance, some soldiers marching up and down, and an old lady comes out and waves. That's it. That's our empire now. So I can see how the satire comes in there.
Yeah. Not intentionally, but yes.
No. But it's because you've been influenced, and you don't know, none of us know what influences are out there, but we've all been influenced by things we hear, things we live through, things that are just experiences, and that becomes part of our writing process. That's I think anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you won the Squirrel Award. What is that?
So the Golden Squirrels are an indie author award ceremony that a lady called Joanne van der Leerdam runs. She's in Australia.
Right.
And she used to do them every year, but I think lockdown sort of, it affected so many things. And she reads a lot of indie author books and poetry, and she gives out awards for what she thinks are the best new books that year in different genres and categories. So it's really nice. She runs a book blog called The Book Squirrel, where she puts all of her reviews, and it's just really nice recognition from writers in the same boat as you, really, like independent authors, not traditionally published, and just a nice little bit of recognition for your hard work and what you've been doing, and that people do like what you're writing, which is always nice. Always good to know.
And so was that for one of the books in the Rosshaven case files?
Yes, that was for the Interspecies Poker Tournament, which is a novella, so about 45,000 words. Because I had this idea for for a story that ended up being quite short. Yeah. And then I thought, well, I could call it a case file, and then in the future I could write some more case files. Yeah. And have sort of smaller stories available for people to read. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. And then I wrote one and I haven't been back to write anymore, but I am planning, I'd like to have a go at doing rapid release. So I'd like to have a go at writing 3 or 4 at once, getting them all ready, and then doing a rapid release strategy for them, which is obviously a marketing tactic. So I'd like to give that a go. Maybe next year, maybe 2023. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And have you done any of these to audio?
Yes, I have put the Interspecies Poker Tournament out on audio. I decided to narrate myself. I have a couple of books of short stories which have been narrated by someone else, which was a lovely experience. And she was really nice and she did a really good job. But I just like to know how things work. How do you do it? So I thought I'd give it a go myself. Took a long time to get the setup right. A couple of different microphones down the line. Yeah. I'm sure you know what that's like. Finding the right one for the job. I have a little tiny cubby in my bedroom, which is stuffed full of blankets and pillows and all kinds of things, where my mic is set up. And the quality's not bad. I mean, it's pretty good. But I have a sound guy who runs it through his equipment for me as well. And then we have exactly the same quality as
required
as the big people. So I think that's really important. If you're going to do it yourself, you need to, hit that quality.
I agree.
Mark.
It's the same as book covers and blurbs and that sort of stuff. They've all got to be, in my opinion, better than published books that you see in Waterstones, because that's what we're up against. Yeah. I personally feel that the independent author really is the standard bearer now for high quality work.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
So the Silk Thief, then, that's the second
Roshaven, yep.
Yeah, Roshaven. So have we covered really that, or is there another elevator pitch you want to give for it?
Well, I mean, I can do all three really quickly. So we start with the Rose Thief, which is where you're introduced to Ned and his team, and basically someone is stealing the Emperor's magical roses. And if they're not stopped, he's going to steal the red rose, which happens to be linked with love. The Emperor cast a spell. It was a very stupid thing to do years ago, and he linked the rose to love. And if the rose is stolen, then love will leave Roshaven. And when it does go, people start getting mean and they stop caring about things and nothing gets done. So Ned has to go on a quest, and there's a bit of fun poking about, you know, going on a quest, and he has to defeat vampire mermaids and illusionists. He has to get past his strange family members, and then there's a final battle with an evil sorcerer, of course, at the end. You know, and it's the whole sort of what could possibly go wrong. So that's the first book. I wrote that almost as a homage to Terry Pratchett, because that was written around the time that we lost Sir Terry, and I loved his book so much, and I just found they just used to amuse me so much that I really wanted to try and pay homage to him, and to the fact that I enjoyed them so much. Would I maybe like writing something like that? And it turned out I did. So we sort of went from there, and then I had a little break between the Rose Thief and the Silk Thief, because, you know, I think you have to sort of marinate ideas as well.
I agree.
And so the Silk Thief came out in April, and that one we shift our focus to the Empress of Roshaven. So Ned is still there. He still plays a big role, but the focus is shifted slightly. And this time we have a scheming villain who is plotting to steal the trade, the crown, and the Empress, while our heroes Ned and Jenny must scramble to thwart his dastardly plan. So we have a sort of another bad guy, and it's up to Ned and Jenny to sort of figure out what's going on and stop him. And then that brings us through to the Bone Thief, which comes out in November, as I said. And that is where Roshaven is being threatened by the Spice Ghosts, as they demand the return of their mystical bones. But of course, Jenny doesn't know anything about them. So this book shifts to be more of a Jenny book. And Ned and Jenny have to follow their skeletal trail into the dark waters of the Sea Witch. There's lots going on. And you can read each book on its own, but you can also read them obviously sequentially as well.
That sounds wonderful. So what kind of age group are you writing for there?
Well, I take a leaf out of Terry's book there and say I write for 9 to 99. I don't write for kids, although I do often get asked, do I write for children because of my book covers? But I don't write intentionally for children. I just write for people who enjoy a story. A bit of adventure, dash of magic, some comedy. You know, it really is for all ages.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I totally understand that completely. So you've written a climate fiction novel, which I think is called Cli-Fi. So that is just another genre that the Gaia effect books or the Gaia books fit into. Right. So they're hopeful dystopian, because they're not doom and gloom, which you really expect from post-apocalyptic dystopian books. But there's this sort of new genre that's coming through that's called Cli-Fi, climate fiction. And especially in the third book in that series, I do talk a lot about the effects of climate on the earth and what could potentially happen. So that does make sense to me. I think that it's impossible for us authors, especially if we're involved in fantasy, to turn our eyes away from the actual oncoming cataclysm is there every single day in the news. That's what satire is about. When you're writing satire, is try to conjure up ideas which examine these possibilities without being too serious about them all.
Well, I think if you look at anything that's going on, really, I mean, you have to laugh about it. And you know, the pickle that we're in at the moment with the lorry drivers and not being able to get things in and out the country and all of that. And I mean, you have to laugh because if you didn't, you'd cry.
It's like we haven't grown up from Victorian times. We're still trying to use the same idea.
Well, you know what they say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And then if it is broke, let's carry on anyway.
So true. Typical British way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So you're is it deputy editor or sub-editor of writing?
Deputy editor, yep, that's right.
Okay, so tell us about that magazine then.
So Write On magazine came about through Pen to Print, so the same people who I started my writing journey with.
Yeah.
They were approached by a lady called Madeline White, who suggested that Pen to Print put together a magazine, and they decided to run with it, basically. They brought Madeline on board because she has magazine experience, and the magazine is designed to help aspiring writers, to help give them a voice. So it is based in Barking and Dagenham and surrounding boroughs, but it does also have a worldwide reach because of the online aspect. Obviously, when lockdown happened and the libraries closed and nobody could go anywhere and we couldn't print the magazine, we moved completely online and we started a daily digest. So we were putting up content every day for people, and we really saw a lot of growth there. We had submissions from all over the world. We were encouraging new writers, existing writers to share their experiences, their top tips, to share their creative work. And as I say, and the magazine just keeps going from strength to strength. We publish quarterly, so we still have a physical magazine, and then we have weekly pages up online. And we don't do every day anymore, but we still do 4 to 5 pages a week. So there's new content all the time. And we've interviewed some incredibly interesting people, some big names, some small names, up and coming names. And Pen to Print continue to do work year round with authors, and they have a huge reading festival called Read Fest that runs through September, where they just have lots and lots and lots of workshops from different authors writing different genres, and it's all free. So there's this huge resource available for aspiring writers, creative people. We've just launched a podcast. We had the soft launch last month, so that's just getting off the ground. So it really is this sort of vehicle for people to share their creativity. And it doesn't matter if you've written before or not, whatever your background, whatever your experience, whatever you choose to write about. I mean, obviously we do have themed editions, but yeah, it's amazing. And there's this huge community that's really grown out of that. And there are just more and more opportunities coming up. We were just recently sponsored by the Wilbur and Smith Foundation, who obviously adventure writing. I'm sure you've heard of Wilbur Smith. And he was our agony uncle in our latest issue. And that was huge because he doesn't really do interviews anymore. So that was amazing. And it's just sort of opportunities like that coming through all the time. We had our cover star was a Black poet who lives in Wales, but is trying to blend his culture and community into his poetry, into where he lives. So there's real diaspora feeling of identity and how it fits.
Could you just go through that website for me, Pen to Print?
Yeah, Pen to Print. So pentoprint.org. That's the website.
And is that where people would go if they want to subscribe to the magazine?
Yep, there's a Write On tab which gets you all the details of the magazine.
Okay, and if you wanted, what is it then downloaded as PDF type thing? It's
an online reader.
Okay.
So you turn the page.
I understand. Yeah. No,
yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And so that would be completely free to a reader. Yes. Say, for example, I lived in Australia and I wanted to read that. Could I read that completely free?
Completely free. Yep.
So where should listeners go to get your latest book? What would be the first place you would point them to get your next book?
To get my next book? Well, my website is clairebust.co.uk, and you can find everything there. You've got links.
That's Claire with an E, isn't it?
Yes, Claire with an E.
Could you spell that out for us, please?
I can. It's CLAIREBUSS.
Thank you.
So clairebust.co.uk. All my books are on there. all my information is on there. My latest book is there on the front page, and I have universal links. I have universal book links because I am wide, so my books are available everywhere that they sell books. So I have universal links. So if you prefer to download from Kobo, if you like getting your books from Google Play, if you're an Amazon person, I've got you covered.
Very sensible. Very sensible. And where would people go first if they want to follow you? Your day-to-day activities. Have you got somewhere that they can follow you?
I have, I'm on Twitter. So my handle on Twitter is Grasshopper2407.
Okay.
And,
why is that? Why is it called Grasshopper?
Oh, because I created my Twitter account before I decided to become an author.
Oh, right.
And I haven't got around to changing it. And it just so there you go. And I am on Facebook. I have a author group which is called Buses Book Stop, which you can search and find.
Buses, like in BUSSES?
Apostrophe S. So BUSS apostrophe S.
Oh, right.
Book Stop. Okay. Yeah. And I'm facebook.com /bus writer.
Oh, that's good.
So
could anybody come and join this group that you?
Yep, my Facebook group is open. Everyone can come along, and I tend to put most of my news bits and bobs on there, giveaways, free copies, competitions, project updates, etc. In my Facebook group, and then trickle it out to Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Grasshopper2407 as well. I kept those the same.
Why not?
Just for ease.
Once you've gone down that Grasshopper route, might as well stick with it.
I know.
So November, you've got your launch.
Yes, November.
Are you having
12th.
a party and all that?
I haven't fully decided, because in my experience, Facebook parties are great, but you tend to get people who have already bought you and followed you, and you don't tend to get a lot of new people. No. So I haven't fully decided, but there will definitely be some pomp. There'll be something. There might be. It is currently on 99p pre-order, so it's sort of being promoted through that at the moment.
Will I go Kindle Unlimited, or you don't bother doing that?
No, I don't go. I go wide, so I'm not exclusive to Amazon.
Very sensible. And will that be available in paperback as well as?
It will, yes.
Cool.
All things being equal, the paperback will go live at the same time.
What else is coming up this year?
So coming up this year, I've got a lot of write-on things happening. I'm going to be interviewing a children's author called Frances Harding, which I'm very excited about. And I will just be keeping things ticking over with obviously new release Bone Thief, pushing that. I've started audio recording The Rose Thief. It'd be nice to get that out next year. And then my plan is to go back to my poor neglected novellas, go back to my case files, get those written. I've been doing some extremely amusing research at the moment for weird crime, things that I can sort of get inspiration from. I've got a few ideas anyway, but it's always nice to have a bit of external inspiration. And then, as I say, I've got an idea for the next series of Roshaven books. There's a character in there who I feel needs some exploration, so we might take him in a new direction.
So you're going to stick with Roshaven for a bit, because you want.
I think so. There's a lot
see
more
around the place.
There's a lot more life in there. I have two other ideas. One of them is very, very early, so I can't really talk about that one. But another book I started writing is urban fantasy. It's about a girl called Kat. She has an autistic brother, and she gets sort of introduced to the magical side of the world she didn't know existed. Which is obviously standard YA stuff. And I've started writing that. It's quite important to me to have the autistic character there, because my son is autistic, so I really want to sort of include that. That's a project, but it's time, as with all things, it's time, isn't it? So
How do you actually organise your day? Do you have a period where you just sit down and write, or do you just try and squeeze it in when you can?
I try to squeeze it in, to be fair. Both my children are now at school. Admittedly, Annabelle is at nursery, but it's school hours, so that has been a huge help. So it's a case of coming in. So from about 9 till 2, I try to do the work. And then when I've picked them up from school, I do the other work, the mum stuff. The
real stuff.
And then usually by about 8:30, I collapse in a heap. And then I decide, do I need to do more work or am I good? Wow. So I joined a great Facebook group, actually, called 500 Words a Day. And they encourage people to just hit that word count. Which is not very much, 500 words.
It's not like NaNoWriMo, which is 2,500, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, if you're doing no writing, I find this often happens. If you're doing no writing on Monday, and then Tuesday rolls around and you still don't do any writing, and then Wednesday rolls around, you start to feel under pressure. You start to feel panicked and worried, and you start to feel, I can't write. And that is not a great place to be. Whereas if you manage to squeeze out 400 to 500 words on Monday, and you did the same on Tuesday and Wednesday, by the end of the week, you've got 3,000, 4,000 words. Yeah. You've got a chapter. Exactly. You've got something, and you can feel good about yourself. And then going into the next week, you might write 750 or 1,000 words a day, because I find personally that writing is a very emotional experience. Wow, and if you're feeling good and you're feeling up and creative and inspired, I can sit down and write 2,000-3,000 words in a sitting. That's easily. Not a problem. But if I'm not feeling that, that's true. I struggle.
That's true. So, I find it not only to be emotionally draining and obviously intellectually exhausting, but I find it physical. I literally ache all over after a decent bit of writing, because obviously it affects your shoulders if you're writing and typing, affects your arms and your wrists and everything. I can't, sitting in one place is bad for you, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Looking at one screen is bad for you. So it is a physically exhausting, mentally exhausting, intellectually exhausting, emotionally exhausting experience. And then we charge 99p for the finished product. People say, I'm not paying that. I'd rather pay £2.30 on coffee.
I know. But there you go, the life of an author.
Mind you, this is the only thing I want to do. So.
Exactly.
Well, congratulations on everything that you've done so far. Really,
thank you very much.
Exciting and interesting, I suppose, mini career that you've had so far, which is going to blossom into a really big career. I've no doubt at all. Congratulations on your new release, and hopefully that's all going to go really well for you. I'll be looking out for that when it comes out. And is there anything else you'd like to add before you go? Anything else we haven't talked about you'd like to have mentioned?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I often think that one of the great things about the indie author community is how willing everyone is to help and offer advice and share their experiences. So if anything I've mentioned has anyone asking or querying or wondering, then, drop me a line. You can contact me through my website or via Facebook. And just, if there's anything you want to ask about, get in touch. Please feel free.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice rest of your day.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, bye.